developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC
It's okay? Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Sorry about the delay. Today is a chaos here, the third day, but it's the same. Luan, sorry about, I know it's 3 a.m. in Brazil or 3:30 a.m., so sorry about that. And Henrique hasn't arrived yet. Maybe he has problems. So we are going to start with Marina and Luan. And I would like to thank you, Marina, and also Luan, to be here, and also IDFC, that's our partner, and is organizing the seminar. And our main goal here is to discuss basic nature solutions and carbon market, the voluntary carbon market growth in Brazil, now that the law for the carbon market is almost approved. So we are foreseeing a growth in the perspective for the voluntary carbon market, and we have lots of solutions in Brazil, and also especially in the global south, that we have great potential in providing nature-based solutions to contribute to the world climate goals. Brazil and Indonesia alone have 50% of this potential. The international carbon market, with the Paris Agreement Articles 6.2 and 6.4 regulation, can make this the potential a reality. So here today, we aim to discuss the possibilities in Brazil about the carbon market and nature-based solutions. And we'll start with Marina talking about ReGreen. She works there. She's a lawyer and very experienced lawyer. And she now joins ReGreen. It's a new company in Brazil, but with lots of projects. And she's going to talk about that. And after we have Luan. And Luan is a representative of ILAC. That's a group in Latin America and Caribbean that discuss carbon market for the region. So I pass the floor to Marina, and then we're going to discuss and have some questions afterwards. Thank you very much. Oh, this is the first one, so it's McKinsey, so we have to put the ReGreen presentation. Sorry.
Hi, everyone. I think, can you hear me all? I'm assuming yes. So, hi, nice to meet you all. My name is Mariana Barbosa. I work at ReGreen. I'm currently acting as Legal and Institutional Relations Officer. And my role today is present you a little bit more about ReGreen. Let me see if I can just change here. I think it's not working. Okay. Okay. So, ReGreen is a Brazilian company. We were founded in 2021, and we are working on large-scale restoration projects, both in the Amazon and Atlantic rainforest in Brazil. Our goal is to recreate tropical forests as well as protect and restore biodiversity. I'm going to talk a little bit more about where we're going, and then I want to take a few minutes to also present where we already are at. So what have we been developing on the past 20 months? So our goal is to restore 1 million hectares of tropical forests in Brazil. Brazil has a potential of 20 million hectares of degraded land or more. So that's where we see a lot of potential and opportunities in Brazil. Our goal is also to capture 15 million tons of carbon, and also derive positive impacts in terms of social and biodiversity impacts. I want to just talk a little bit more about scale here, because for us it's a key message. So when we talk about scale, we're trying and we're working to have more efficiency in restoration in Brazil, and then also drive economic and financial return, making the activity itself scalable and sustainable in terms of financial returns. And that in itself would allow us to restore more land over time. We are currently working on 2 financial incomes, so carbon credits, as Claudia was mentioning. That's where we're joining the climate solutions and restoration, which is not a new activity itself. It's something that in Brazil has been developed over years actually, but more in a specific small scale activities for legal regularization and not for economic return. So I think our key innovation here is looking at restoration as a way of generating financial income. So carbon credits one way. We're also looking at silviculture for native species. So that's another thing. Brazil is a leading country in terms of exotic species silviculture, so a lot of pinus, eucalyptus. So we're trying to employ a lot of research and development, and also develop the silviculture of native species as a way of promoting restoration. Our goal is to have one cycle of silviculture in part of our portfolio, not all of the properties. And as this, like kind of generating more income with the property and allowing restoration for other properties. We're working with 15 species for silviculture. So it's kind of also a way of working with bioeconomy. We also believe in the potential of generating social impact. So we have a lot of studies in Brazil demonstrating that we can create over 42 jobs for each hectare of restored area in Brazil, 2 hectares of restored areas in Brazil. And that comes pretty much from collecting seeds in native forests, and also for the seedling itself, like for generating the seedlings. We're also trying to generate positive social impacts through the property. So a lot of the properties we can also have, for example, acai extraction and other type of sustainable livelihoods. So that's one of the things we're looking at, not only to generate income for Regreen, but especially to generate positive impacts for the communities living around where we're acting at. And also in terms of biodiversity, so when we're choosing the land that we're going to be either purchased or going to be working as a partnership, we're looking for lands where you can have also increasing the biodiversity protection. So we can find, for example, when you're looking at the map, we manage to choose properties where the restoration itself can lead to 100% of reversion of the biodiversity loss risk for a specific species. So that's key for us when we're looking for the properties that we're going to act on. But instead of only talking about what are our goals, I really want to take the chance here to present where we are right now, because I think we have achieved many things over like 20 months of work since 2021. So the company was founded in 2021. In 2022, we got our first financing. So we got like our Series A. We were able to launch to $80 million. And that actually allowed us to start working on 3 main things that are key for our business model. The first one, we acquired this native plant nursery in Brazil, which is not only key for our chain itself, so we're generating part of the seedlings that we're working on, not all of them. I think it's important to say that most of the properties that I'm going to present right now, the ones that we're already working on, we also purchase a lot of the seedlings of the seeds from local nurseries, but bioflora is for us a key issue to develop the native species silviculture. So we have a lot of R&D to be developed and how we can create like clones and things like this, but also to have other types of techniques to improve the generation of the seeds itself. So I think that's key for us, and it's located in Piracicaba. We are already producing 3 million seedlings per year, and our goal is to produce 8 million. And we have invested a lot on machines, laboratories, and these kind of things. So that's another picture of bioflora. It's beautiful. If you ever come to Brazil, it's amazing. So that's one of, let me see if I can get back. So that machine over there, that was a key development as well, because before we had all the plants and all the seedlings came in on plastic, And now we have this, which is a biodegradable paper pot. And actually that, in addition to the environmental impact, it also allows us to gain productivity and scale when planting the trees. That's our first project. Ouro Verde is located in the Atlantic rainforest in Bahia. The south of Bahia is considered a high spot of biodiversity. So a lot of the restoration movement in Brazil is starting in the south of Bahia. So that's very significant as well. It's very symbolic. It's very close to where the Portuguese arrived in Brazil. So not only it has a lot of biodiversity perspective, but also in terms of like reforesting what has been degraded since Brazil and the Portuguese arrived in Brazil. That's also key for us to have the symbolic and perspective for the project. We already concluded this restoration, so we're waiting for the plants to grow. It's a property of 700 hectares, and we restored over 300 hectares with native species. This is the first one. We also have part of the property being developed for silviculture, and it's going to be a good way of seeing how this is going to be. Our goal is to have like the species and the trees with the same quality of a primary forest. Also as a way to reduce the pressure over primary forests in the future. So that's a lot of and as you can see, I think that compared to other nature-based solutions, we're trying to bring here a lot of kind of more a lot of research and innovation in planting. So that's also where we can see you are using all the machines and stuff. And that the second property, we're also started to use more of drones and other kind of technologies. So not only drones for monitoring, but also drones for applying fertilizers if we need to, or for planting. So that's our second property, also in the south of Bahia. We already planted 1,300 hectares of restorable land. It's a very different property from the previous one. I think that's another challenge for scale because we're gonna have to have a scale project, but also looking at the particular aspects of each location we are working on. All of them with only native species from the Atlantic rainforest. Always using, we're going back to that's the third project we're working on. But I think it's important to say that we're also always looking for local workers and also local suppliers of the seeds, the seedlings, and everything else, because our goal is also to kind of help developing the property, the project, and the region itself. So the third project we're working on, I think that's our first entrance into the Amazon. It's located in Maranhão, right close to Pará, as the area that was first deforested from the Amazon rainforest. It's the Amazon biome. As you can see, it's a very large property, 18,000 hectares, out of which we're reforesting 9,000 hectares. From what we know, and of course there is little data about it, but from the things that we've researched so far, it's probably the largest continuous restoration project in Brazil and probably in Latin America. So there is it's a big challenge in itself. We already started reforesting this area, but I think here it's also important, like from a social perspective, we're also working with the local communities. They get into the property to extract acai and other bioeconomies. And I think a great innovation here is that when we were doing the stakeholder local consultation process, we also listen to the community to understand what are the species that they are using the most for economic return, and we're trying to use those in our restoration models. Of course, we have to do the measurements between like how much carbon they store and these kind of things, but that's where we're looking at. We're trying to listen to them, seeing what are the ones that they're using the most, and trying to include those in our restoration models. So that's what I wanted to bring to you. We have more pictures here, like for where we are right now. So so as you can see, like this tree over there, we planted last year, and it's like already like a human-sized being. So I just wanted to bring a lot of like what we're doing so far, because I think it's also important to we are always talking about the challenges and of the opportunities, but I think the things that we have already accomplished so far are like very impressive in terms of like the small time. So we planted, for example, 1 million trees in a year. So that's also a lot. That's why I hope to have a good conversation today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mariana. I'll pass the floor to Luan, and then we can make some questions, and I'll talk about the role of the development banks to to scale up this kind of projects. Thank you, Luan. Hope you're awake. Sorry about the time and about our delay. Hi, how are you? It's a pleasure.
Hello, I'm fine. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's fine.
Nice. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, Claudia, and the BNDS team. It's also I would like to also to thank IDFC for the invitation. It's always relevant to talk about the opportunities and also the challenge that we have and we need to face towards the carbon market, especially at the current momentum here in Brazil. And it was nice to, it's going to be nice to talk after Marina, because she already showed us a lot of interesting opportunity for the Brazilian region. But my presentation here is going to be focused not only in Brazil, but also in the LAC region. So I'm going to compare some things, some particulars related to each country in the region. Here, I'm talking on behalf of TAF, especially in the ILAC project, which is the Latin America and Caribbean Initiative for developing the carbon market. But I'm also representing the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, the university where I work with. But basically, my idea here in terms of presentation is to briefly present why should we talk about carbon market in LAC region. I'm going to show some interesting data from why we are kind of losing some really interesting opportunity when it comes to carbon market development in the region, and then I'm going to dive into the ILAC initiative, present a little bit what it is, what's our main purpose, and what we have already done, and what are the next steps for the initiative. And then I'm going to dive into the Brazilian case, which is really interesting in the region, as not only because of we are the biggest country in the region, but also because we have a lot of different opportunities, not only in terms of forestry sector, but also looking at different sectors in the economy. So in terms of context and opportunities for LAC, Claudia already told us about the Article 6, especially 6.2 and 6.4, in terms of the Paris Agreement, and also how this can boost the demand for carbon credits globally, especially considering the NDCs from different countries worldwide. And of course, LAC can be a huge supplier of these credits. Especially here at this presentation, look at the nature-based solutions. But as I have already mentioned, not only considering nature-based solutions. For example, we can see a lot of projects regarding infrastructure sector, energy sector, renewable energy. I mean, a lot of different opportunities. I'm going to show you some data from LAC region. Also, we have to see that we are currently discussing voluntary market here, but we also have a lot of opportunities when it comes to the integration of this voluntary carbon market with regulated carbon markets. And Claudia already told us about the approval of our draft law for the regulatory carbon market here in Brazil. So yes, we have a lot of interesting opportunities, especially looking at offset. And we can see, as I have already mentioned, forestry opportunities in the forest sector, climate smart agriculture, renewable energy, and also blue economy, which is a really, I would say, really interesting and opportunity here in Brazil, especially. And also BNDS is already have a lot of discussion in terms of how can we develop this opportunity here in the country. Last but not least, it's also important to mention, as Marina already did, that we have also to look at the social aspect of this agenda. And yes, we can sort of develop interesting social opportunities as generating jobs, creating sustainable business cluster, attracting technologies, and also it can be a way to catalyze national and also international private capital. So all these contexts bring us a really interesting momentum, I would say, and also environment. And when we look at data from the state of the voluntary carbon market from the last year, what we can see is that Latin America and the Caribbean region accounts for about 22% of the project in terms of value. So we are like the most important region in terms of important in terms of supply credits. And this vary in terms of sectors, but major, basically what we have is the forest and land use project. So we have a lot of interesting opportunities when it comes to looking at the agroforestry and reforestation sector. So it's not as easy as it can be wondered, but we also have some challenges. Here I list a few challenges that we are addressing as a ILAC, and also hearing and knowing from the empirical, I would say, experience in the region. The first one is that we are considering the creation, the development of a Latin American carbon market in the region. So what we have here is kind of some challenges related to think about this regional market, but also think about the local and regional markets that are already being discussed and developed in each country. So how can we combine this integration? It's not easy. So it's, I would say, one of the biggest challenge we are facing. Also, because we understand that we have different side of the markets, especially looking at the size of the countries, for example, Brazil and other countries in the region. We also have to develop an appropriate and also an attractive financial and non-financial instrument in order to mobilize the finance of the projects. Besides harmonizing, for example, taxonomies, standards, norms, certifications, monitoring service, we have a lot of discussion when it comes to integrity and also transparency, the necessity of organized institution, the transparency, governance. So we have some challenge to address, and this is the reason why we are proposing this Latin America and the Caribbean initiative for developing the carbon markets, the ILAC. And the main objective of this initiative, which is managed by CAF, is to create a market intelligence tool in order to support monitoring, communication, and also dissemination of up-to-date information related to the carbon market in the region. So basically what we have here is look at the region and see what happens in here, not in terms of carbon markets in general, as we can see from, for example, World Bank studies and analysis, for example. What are our potential related to our region? So this was the main objective of this initiative, and we have in this context some issues and some outputs and some outcomes as well, because we have to filter relevant information for the region, which is not easy because we have some lack of data in specific countries and also specific sectors. It's not easy to get around all this data, and but also we want to innovate when it comes to this analyze also risks, and do a really interesting stakeholder engagement in this process. So we also are working on the database pool. So we are creating a database for the voluntary markets in the region, and in order to assess some statistical analysis in terms of historical analysis, and also to keep it possible to make trends and see into the future in terms of different and variation of price, for example. We have in our analysis not only the region analysis, but also compare it with the world analysis, and for each country analyzed as well. And we have this integration because this is an initiative managed by CAF, but it's made in partnership with the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. So we have a team of experts working on this information, working in all this data. And we have, for example, some outputs, basically bulletins and technical notes that I'm going to show you in the next slides. The initiative is based in 3 different components. The first one is the regional policy agenda, where we are interested in assessing and looking into the possible development of particular carbon markets in the level of the country, but also considering the regional perspective. The second component is very much based on regional technical programming, which means that we are looking at the development of a roadmap aimed to develop taxonomies and also considering the harmonization of the standards and certification in the region, in the different countries, because we have different particularities in each country. And the third one is regarding the knowledge management, which means that we are interested also in generating and dissemination and knowledge about this the situation for carbon marketing in the region, in order to accelerate the learning process and also to strengthen the chain of the carbon market. So here I just share one of our outputs. In the left, we can see the first bulletin that we have shared and presented in Buenos Aires. I had the opportunity to be with Claudia in Buenos Aires in the launch of the first bulletin. It was in this last August. And here we also have this QR code where you can just put your camera there and find all this information that I'm sharing with you, the bulletins, other analysis, data, everything is free, available in the website. And basically, the idea is to ILAC being an intelligence tool for supporting the carbon market development in the region. I would highlight that these documents are all available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. So the idea is to spread the word and some data just to have an idea about what kind of assessment we are doing. Is this kind of information where we have the volume of carbon credits in the region, divided, split into countries. And it's interesting to see that, for example, when we look at the share, Brazil is the highest. So yes, of course, we have to dive into the Brazilian case. Almost 42% of the credits come from Brazil in the region, and very much based on nature-based solution. But when we look, for example, to other countries, for example, Chile and Argentina, we see that nature-based solutions are not the major credits, but they are very much focused on renewable energy. So we have different sectors. It creates, I would say, an interesting opportunity when it comes to the supply in the region. Not only focus on a specific sector, but we can use different sectors in the economy, considering different countries in the region. Diving into the Brazilian case, it's interesting because Brazil, we just started the COP28, but Brazil, the government wants to regain, I would say, the political preeminence in the climate agenda internationally. So this is, for example, this was the biggest, the largest delegation Brazil ever had to COP. Also, it's important to highlight that the data that we have dropped the rate of deforestation in the Amazon about 22%. So this data comes from the National Institute for Space Research. It's also interesting related to the agroforestry and reforestation agendas. And as Claudia already mentioned, we have the approval of the draft bill, the PL 412, Projeto de Lei 412, which is, we have a lot of work to do, but at least we have something more concrete in terms of the next steps. Unfortunately, agribusiness sector is not covered, which is an issue. But we are currently discussing and defining the legal, regulatory, and also the governance aspect. And finally, it's important to also address that this draft bill is about the regulatory market, but we also have some possible connections when it comes to the voluntary market. It's already considered in this draft bill, so we have a lot of opportunity, and the ILAC wants to address these opportunities not only looking into the Brazilian case, but considering its potential and relations to the other countries in the region. So from my side, that is, and I'm open to the discussion that are going to take place. Thank you very much.
It's working? Yes. Thank you, Luan. It's a pity that Henrique could not attend because ILAC is one of the initiatives. We have the voluntary market initiative that McKinsey takes part, BNDES takes part both in ILAC, and also we are supporting this initiative. We think that has a voluntary market, very transparent and with good projects. It's very important to boost this kind of project that could reduce emissions in the world very fast and with low cost. So taking the opportunity to join the panel with multilateral banks and also development banks, it's very important for us to provide finance or even collaterals for this kind of projects. That's why I'm going to start the questions to Marina, because there are some important advance development that our banks has to have to support this kind of projects, because they are new and we are used to finance infrastructure, finance industrial projects, but not forest projects. So BNDES has experience, but we have to be more flexible, accepting new collaterals as contracts, carbon market contracts, long-term contracts, and also when this market is developed, it's going to help us to finance this kind of projects, all the development banks. And also think about like the Green Climate Fund and other funds to provide guarantees for this kind of projects. So Marina, I would like to ask you some questions. And as pioneers in the reforestation sector, what challenges are you now facing, such as corresponding adjustment of Article 6.2 and project financing, provide guarantees, technical bottlenecks, carbon storage risk, insurance? What kind of bottlenecks are you overviewing in our sector to assess new projects and finance?
So I would start saying that I think as a new company in a sector under development, I sleep every day with challenges and opportunities itself on the other hand. So I think I could name several, but I would start saying that I think, in my opinion, the first, and not only looking at regreen, but looking at the sector in general, like going to large-scale restoration projects, which is a sector that is being developed in Brazil. I would say that one of them is how we frame risk, because I think every time we're discussing financing or like a commercial initiative, the players are used to discuss the risk of not developing the project. Like underperformance of the project is a risk that is on the table every day. So that kinds of affects guarantees and other parts, collaterals, anything. But what I don't see on the table is like the risk of not having the project at all. So like the risk of not having action on climate change. So we already have the numbers. We know, for example, from Deloitte that can cost us like $178 trillion. We know from Stern that can cost like 5 times more than acting on climate change. But I think it's a very hard equation on how to bring to the table, because that's like a broader risk and it's something that is going to cost everyone. So it's very hard to bring to the table when you're discussing guarantees, financial assessment or commercial assessment, the risk of the project not existing at all. Like what happens if Regreen, Mombach, Biomas, and all the other large-scale restoration projects in Brazil stop existing? That's never on the table. So I think that actually leads us to a risk assessment that's real, but also unreal, like to the sense that it doesn't cover the actual sense of the climate risk and climate crisis that we have nowadays. So I think that's challenge number one. And I actually don't have the answer. Like, how can we bring and how can all the players kind of put into their equation the risk of not acting on climate change at all, or not working on climate solutions? I think that's a very hard question, but I think that's something that we need to address every time more, because we're running out of time. And then if we take like so much time discussing collaterals, and those are important things. I don't want to say that this is not important, but I just feel that this risk is not being considered. So I think that's number one. I think the other thing is what we were saying, like the type of guarantee we're discussing, those are sometimes, or collaterals or other type of financing, those are sometimes not, I think that the players need to understand better our sector. So what are the actual risks? What is the risk of a project like a restoration project? If you do the planting okay, what is the risks of the trees taking longer or not so longer, like we're talking about force majeure and these kind of things. So I think we're still looking at but when we shift to the guarantees, we're still looking into financing. Who's gonna take the risk of the project and the performance? So I think when we see in our position, we're still discussing the guarantees, as you mentioned. So like the type of things we're discussing is like whether having a lien on the property, whether we're going to have a lien on the shareholders, but we're not, there is other type of things that we could be discussing, for example, as having the carbon credit agreement, like the offtake under guarantee or these kind of things. So I think we need to develop this. And then I would say the third one is, often I see, especially in Brazil, people going for companies like ourselves or other large companies and putting on us the weight on developing the chain. And I think that where we can have like very creative financial instruments in terms of developing. So we can have CRAs or other type of financial instruments and concessional fundings as well to help us develop the chain. Of course, we're going to have a role in that, but I don't want to have all the suppliers with exclusivity contract with Green, for example. That's not good for me, and that's not good for the chain as well. So I think that we have to start thinking more creatively in terms of financial instruments to develop the chain. And as a last thing that's often on the table when you're discussing guarantees and commercial agreements is how I think it's clear to us that it's going to be a connection between the regulated or like mandatory carbon market and the voluntary market. But it's still unclear how this connection is going to be, like how it's going to be corresponding adjustments. It's very common for now when you're discussing an offtake agreement, for example, for those players wanting to have like the sense that they're going to be able to have the corresponding adjustments because they still don't know what they're going to use the carbon credits for. So there's still a lot of uncertainty. And whenever you have uncertainty, that leads to more expensive money, that leads to more expensive financing. So I think it's important that we start like reducing those uncertainties, how it's going to be the connection between the markets, how there are many developments there, how the voluntary market is going to be claiming the carbon credits. That's another thing. Like, are we still going to be talking about compensation or are we going to be talking about financing? So it's all those claims over carbon credits, that's kind of another zone of uncertainty that's still kind of challenging how, because they're talking about like projects of long-term projects. Our projects last for like 50 years minimum, and then we're talking about permanence. So all those kind of certainties that we have right now, they're also leading and being a challenge for the development. But I also think that there are opportunities. So we have now in Brazil like a government that is looking at this. So we have BNDES, we have the ecological plan, transformation plan. We actually see that there are a lot of initiatives. So I think it's important to choose those challenges because I think we have a political and economic scenario that can enable us to overcome those challenges. But you have to act together. We need to be like very precise on choosing those and acting forward.
Thank you, Marina. But despite the carbon market, I think we have to, as banks, discuss how to see these projects as infrastructure in the past, how we start working with project finance, etc. So we have to do the same with this, because the planet needs reforestation. So we have to boost and we have to scale up this kind of projects. Luan, I'm going to ask you a few questions because we don't have much time, but I think it's important to hear from you as a part of ILAC, and we could, as CAF is a member of IDFC as well and other banks, what is the structural challenge to scale up forest restoration in Brazil and Latin America?
Well, hard question, but yes, I just have some point here. First of all, looking at the Brazilian case, for example, historically we have high rates of deforestation, especially in the 90s, and also in the early 20s. So of course, this is a very huge problem when it comes to scale up forest restoration in Brazil. We have issues related, for example, to territorial occupation, aiming, for example, expanding the cultivation of diverse agricultural crops, urban centers, and also the agribusiness sector. For example, as I mentioned in our draft law, we didn't consider this sector. I won't up this discussion here, but it has to be addressed. The impact of not considering the agro in this project. I would also highlight, for example, other issues. Marina just bring up an interesting question, answer actually, regarding the reduce of uncertainty, and this is also an interesting point to look at here, because we don't know exactly what's going to be the future in terms of the next steps of this carbon market here in Brazil. Of course, we have a very much an open government here, so we expect the best for the development and also at COP28, but we don't know exactly. So we have a lot of uncertainty here, and uncertainty means risk. And the banks, for example, don't like to have this high level of risk. So it's also an issue when we discuss with developing banks in the region. But I would also address that we can open up our broad of solutions, not only looking at specific carbon markets, but also other instruments. As Marina said, we have to think about new financial instruments. And for example, BNDES this year has opened the blended finance calls. So why not? Now, why not think about also green bonds? In Brazil, we have green bonds very much focused on energy sector, but also we have some projects related to forestry. So we have a pool of different instruments that can be used. And while we do not have this certainty related to the carbon market, I do understand that we can also look at these opportunities in terms of different instruments to address. So basically, these are the main topics I would highlight, but we also have some challenges related to the coordination of all this dialogue that has to happen. So in this point, I would take TAF for the initiative of Create ILEC, because we put together everybody, different stakeholders there, not only a development bank, but also private sector, academia, other stakeholders that are very much interested in this discussion. So this dialogue has to happen. And also I would highlight the offer of training in this discussion, because we see that, for example, we have people that understand about the environment and climate aspects, but they don't understand about finance, and the other way around as well. We have people that understand about the finance and economics, but when it comes to understand environmental issues, GHG emissions, they don't know almost anything about. So how can we address and how can we train and develop professionals and also companies that understand both sides of the issue? It seems like it's not, no, everybody knows about. No, it's not the fact. I do understand that we have some gaps to address here as well when it comes to training in this agenda.
Clara, can I just?
Yes, please,
You
please.
brought after I answered my question, I was just thinking about it. So I think the lack of understanding, I think it's something that we don't talk that much. So there is a lack of understanding of knowledge of how the reforestation sector acts, what are the actual risks, what are the gaps of knowledge. I think a lot of people on the financing side or on other sides, we don't know. People don't have so much clarity on not actually what are the actual challenges and what are the actual gaps. I think on the other way around as well. But I think it's interesting, for example, even we were looking for all the financing lines for the suppliers that information is very hard to find. So I had to look at all the state banks, understanding what are the lines available, and a lot of people that are like a lot of farmers working on restoration, for example, they were not aware of the lines that are available. And even ourselves, like we're going through an educational process to understand what is our role in that. So we're understanding that because we have like more knowledge, perhaps we can be the one acting, not the one, but one of the ones acting to connect the owners and the nurseries to the lines and the public money that is available there sometimes to even create those, or also to help those farmers going to other kind of funding. So I think the gap on knowledge and the gap on the tools already available, because there are tools available, which are just not so aware of where they are, how they function, to whom they are available to. So I think that's also key to not have efforts being just thrown away like that. We have to be very, very selective. We have little time, not so many people working on that, and not like we have a limited resources, so we have to be very selective on those.
And I think as I work in a bank, I think we banks, we have to discuss that, especially development banks, and think about some, let's say, funds to guarantee projects, etc. I think this could boost and effectively reduce gas emissions and capture gas emissions and it will help countries to achieve their NDCs with more fast, so faster. So it's important to discuss among us and create new instruments to be able to finance and take the money to whom it's concerned. So I think that we can finalize that. Thank you very much, Luan. Thank you very much, Mariana. I think it was a great discussion, and I hope that we can continue discussing that, especially for other banks. So thank you very much, IDFC, for that, and till next time. Thank you, Luan.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Tchau, Luan. Boa noite.
Tchau, tchau. Boa noite. Bom dia aí.
Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals? Knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics. Our 3 goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities. In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals? Knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics. Our 3 goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities. In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals: knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics. Our 3 goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities. In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals: knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics. Our 3 goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities. In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals? Knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics. Our 3 goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities. In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals? knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics. Our 3 goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities. In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals? Knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics. Our 3 goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities, In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals? Knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics. Our 3 goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities. In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals? Knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics. Our 3 goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities. In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club. Created in 2011 and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals: knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics. Our 3 goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities. In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals? Knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics. Our 3 goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities. In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals? Knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this event at the IDFC Pavilion. This event, which will be talking about international cooperation. International cooperation to accelerate national climate action with lessons from the freight sector. So today, this event will discuss some lessons that we derive from the work of the International Deep Decarbonization Pathway Network as an introduction. And then we will have a panel discussion that will focus on the insights emerging notably from the African context on this question of freight, but also more generally on the question of international cooperation, which is one of the hot topics that is being discussed here at COP28. So to get started, let me share some insights from the work that we've been doing in the Deep Decarbonization Pathway Network. So I'm Henri Weisman, the director of this international initiative. Just starting by telling what the DDP is. So this DDP is an international network of international partners from in-country. So we are covering a bit more than 10 countries with active members, and some of them are in the panel today in Nigeria and Senegal, but we are also covering notably number of large emerging economies as our core partners, but we also have in our network a broader range of countries being covered. If we had to summarize our activities, it's work that is country-driven, country-led, and country-owned. So the purpose is really to promote the elaboration of visions from in-country partners to support local decision-making in this variety of countries. But obviously, as an international network, the idea is also to try to elaborate some lessons that can go beyond what pertain to the specific national circumstances and to inform the international cooperation, and that's what we'll be focusing on today. Obviously, for anyone who wants to know more about the work in each specific countries, you can go to our web page where all the information is shared openly in detail. But here to focus on what is the DDP approach to this question of international cooperation. So what the DDP is doing is to develop country-driven, sectorally detailed analysis of national pathways, so providing number of quantitative analysis, notably built from detailed modeling or quantitative assessment, but also with more comprehensive narrative that allows touching all the specificities of the transition that need to happen. And an important feature to be mentioned here is that all the work that is being done is done through extensive stakeholder consultation. So obviously it's expert-based analysis, but it's not developed in an ivory tower. It's developed with the stakeholders, with the spirit to facilitate their participation in the process. But here, what we'll be focusing on, in what can we derive from this in-country perspective for the international discussion? And from the diversity of contexts that we are covering, here we can derive and reveal some key international enablers of the national transformation and establish a global picture, but that doesn't come from a top-down perspective, that emerges as a composite of these national pictures. And that's the lesson from this type of approach that we would like to share today. And so very at a high level, if we look at what are these lessons that derive from this work, we have two key. One is that the transformation of systems that are required for deep decarbonization, as analyzed by our country partners, are not possible without adequate international conditions. Basically, depending on the boundary conditions that define the global picture, the transition will be feasible or not for countries. So we need to define adequate transformation. And the second main conclusion is that if we look at the reality of international cooperation today, these conditions that our scenario demonstrate as critical for implementing national deep decarbonization are largely not in place. So these conclusions are from the GDP. They are consistent with broader assessment like the work done by the IPCC on the one hand, the work that has been summarized by the technical dialogue conducted under the global stocktake in the policy realm. So all these messages are consistent, but here the specificity that they emerge from the in-country perspective. So the basic conclusion, and that basically the main argument that we are making here, that if you combine these two statements, it's clear that we need innovative international cooperation. We need to do more and to do better in terms of international cooperation. That's what I would like to elaborate a bit more on. But before going into the details, just to say that this question of international cooperation is really critical, and we're at a critical moment here at COP28 during these next 2 weeks, because something needs to happen on international cooperation based on this diagnosis. It needs to happen now because, on the one hand, making some progress now on these questions will be critical, notably to support the revision of country engagement by 2025. As we've seen, the capacities for countries to increase the ambition of their NDC will largely depend on clear signals and clear achievements that are made on enhanced international cooperation. The other one, why is it a critical moment, is that, so in this COP28, we are discussing the global stocktake outcome, and part of the mandate of the global stocktake, as per the Paris Agreement, was to enhance international cooperation for climate action. This is a quote from the Paris Agreement. So there is a unique opportunity and a unique momentum just to put this question at the center of the discussion and to imagine ways to improve this question. So what could we expect from a decision on global stocktake? Obviously, not everything will be done inside the UNFCCC. It's very clear that the UNFCCC is a process that needs to connect, that can send a political signal, that can build bridges with other actors and institutions where these solutions can be developed more in depth, and it can create processes to ensure continuity and accountability. And here it's very important for this question of international cooperation to acknowledge that this is not a one-shot exercise. This is a process that needs to be put in place. And so ensuring that there is some continuity is really critical, either inside existing process or outside. That's something that needs to be discussed more in depth. But anyway, that's what the UNFCCC can provide. So on the substance, what are the key innovations to international cooperation? 4 elements I'd like to highlight. First, it needs to be primarily needs-based, meaning that it needs to reflect and to be grounded on the reality of country needs. What are the needs of the countries to support their transformation? And it needs to be supported by enhanced national capabilities, national capacities, because that's the condition for the countries to make sure that there is some ownership of these changes and that the changes that happen effectively support their transition. It needs to be sector-driven. And here, that's notably the main argument, and we'll enter notably in the specific question of freight as an illustration a bit later in the discussion. But here, we need to have ad hoc approaches that provide concrete answers. We need to go beyond overarching discussions. We need to go into the concrete elements. And for this, we need to enter into what is required in each of the different sectors, recognizing that the solution in one sector will not be the same as the solution in another. So we need to go into the nitty-gritty of the needs for each sectors, and these are discussions that needs to be taken up in relevant fora where these sectoral discussions can happen. We need to be forward-looking. So basically, this international cooperation needs to be grounded not only on the supply side, so it's not only what the international cooperation can provide, but we need really to ground that on the needs to promote the systems transformation that are required to implement deep decarbonization as emerging from countries' perspective. And we need to be solutions-oriented. And that goes notably with adopting a holistic perspective, considering the diversity of tools beyond maybe the conventional thinking and the conventional silos of international cooperation. So putting on the table the need that we need to find solutions and define the solutions according to the problem we are facing. These four characteristics are really the main element that should guide the evolution of international cooperation, and these are really, and this is altogether an innovative approach in the sense that this is not really the way international cooperation is approached today. These insights are summarized in our recently released annual report from the Deep Decarbonization Pathway Initiative. So it can be downloaded with a link that appears here on our website, where we distill these key innovations I just discussed, and where we enter into the specifics for 3 sectors as a way to illustrate the benefits of such innovation. We demonstrate, based on the Deep Decarbonization Pathway analysis, how these innovations can concretely provide the support that countries need in their transformation, and highlight some concrete ways to operational. So the 3 sectors are still AFOLU, agriculture, forest, and other land use, and the freight sector. And here today, we thought that we would be focusing a bit more on these insights emerging from the freight sector analysis. And with that, I will hand over to my colleague Jan, who will enter more into the specifics of the freight sector before we go back to a broader discussion in the panel later today. Jan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Henry. So let's now enter into the detail of these sectors and what we have learned from this work with our different country partners. As Henry says, so first maybe a point of context, why freight? And I should say why freight and logistics. I will come back to that. We say freight because, commonly speaking, people, when they talk about the transition of transport, they separate transport in passenger and freight, which is a very broad distinction. So we use just the usual way of splitting it. But clearly, when we are considering, if you look at the recent number, I mean, the freight emissions and transport emissions represent about 40% of the global transport emissions. So, which is not a small piece. Passenger transport emissions, of course, are the 60 remaining percent, but which means that it is a critical sector if we want to achieve the deep decarbonization of the transport sector. And currently, it is overlooked. Globally, it is overlooked in the different analyses we have seen at international level. The discussions are mostly focused on the passenger transitions. So that's the first thing why we wanted to highlight to the international community what the country analysis can provide on this critical sector for the international deep decarbonization. Secondly, what we have learned from the latest IPCC report is also that the transition of these sectors cannot happen if we looked only at an approach that is a technological approach of the transition of the sector. So more a supply side approach, talking about the vehicles only. And that it requires a link with logistics. So now I will make the link indeed with logistics, talking about the industrial transformations, talking about the organization of industrial value chain and so on, and its relation with the transition of the sector. And that's the second item here, saying that analytical work that has been done on the latest NDCs highlight that there is a clear focus on technological measures and a really blind spot on the question of the organizational changes. I will come back to this definition of what we hear or what we mean by organizational changes. And based on this, we have worked with the 5 country partners that are there. So Brazilian colleague, French colleague, colleague from India, from Nigeria and South Africa, to illustrate what means those organizational changes and what is needed, and that's the question that is below, how international cooperation could actually accelerate such organizational changes in the country and that are critical for the freight transport decarbonization. So I will come now to the example from this report on these organizational changes. And we started actually by just talking together based on the national transition pathways that the different teams have developed. And we discussed what are the concrete examples that you have in your national transition and your national scenarios that talk about those organizational measures and changes. And what are these elements? So just to give a few examples, so we highlighted different examples in the report. So in the French case, we were discussing about the need to better talk about freight, to integrate it in the system changes of energy, industry, so really to have a good integration. We also highlighted some measures related to consumer informations and recent laws that has been put on this question about repairability, product lifetime, and those questions that can drive towards a more circular economy function and that could impact the system of production and then the freight and logistics behind it. Other example from Brazil regarding the recent tax reform in the country and how, for example, the change in the production tax in Brazil could have an effect potentially on the localization of the industrial assets and then impact the value chain length. And if you impact the value chain length and kilometer, then it has an impact on the demand and the structure, and it relates then to also the technological choice that are behind. Other example from India and Nigeria insisted, for example, on the question of the shift from road to rail and the questions of infrastructure needs in terms of finance, highlighting in the Indian case, for example, the really unbalanced financing of road versus rail infrastructure, or example from the Nigeria case on the governance situation in the country and what could change in terms of governance to have a more efficient infrastructure planning, but also question how we can attract investment and private investors in those new assets. So many other points that you can find in the report. And finally, other example from Brazil and South Africa on the road taxation system and how these can affect let's say, the competitiveness of the different modes. Or example in the South African case also about the more related to governance and how, for example, the liberalization of some railway infrastructure could help and facilitate have a more competitive sector. Based on all these examples, we have analyzed that we can identify 4 main common organizational shifts. The first one is around a change in producing and consuming more sustainably. The second one is producing goods closer to customers. The third one is developing railways infrastructure integrated into the logistics organizations. And the fourth one is making rail service more competitive than road service. Those are the organizational shifts that we discussed and identified in our reports and that indeed are complementary to the technological changes that are required related to the energy fuels and vehicles. But those 4 are less highlighted, as I was mentioning at the beginning, in all the international discussions. Then, based on this, we enter into, and just to highlight what Henry said before, those are the typical example of the transformations that we need to enter on with real country needs identified in it. And then to discuss what are the type of innovative international cooperation that we need and can support some national transitions. Just to highlight, I will not detail all of them, just to highlight a few examples that reveal this. And I will take, for example, the questions on experience sharing on policies. The example of rail liberalization and concessioning. I remember an example from the South African case that revealed that in the South African context, it was quite difficult to implement such shift and such change in the governance, but that they know and they are aware that other countries have done it in the past and that they can learn from other experience, from other in-country experience, and that typically organizing experience sharing based on the need of the South African colleagues and being discussed with other colleagues from other countries that explain how this could happen and discuss in detail the barriers and the challenges could help them then implement it and, of course, implement the organizational shift that is to reinforce the competitiveness of rail. And you see different examples that are there. Another one is about financing. I will insist on this one, of course, because we are at the IDFC pavilion. I think it makes a lot of sense to also mention that for the freight and logistics transition, we are not only talking about transport infrastructure. And I think this is a very important point. Here, if you look at the 4 organizational transformation, the 2 first ones are related to the system of production and consumption. And clearly, there are also a big challenge to finance some new and innovative manufacturing processes that are aligned with a circular economy model. And those impact or those type of financing will clearly help and support also the transition of reducing the freight transport emission in those countries. So when we talk about financing to decarbonize freight, this is not only about transport infrastructure. This is about financing also industries to develop local supply. So supply chains could be more local than, let's say, very sprawled or sprawled even more broader of the country, the country borders. So those are typical elements that we have highlighted, saying we also need finance for those assets, not only transport infrastructure. And maybe just the final main messages, I think, that are about what needs to change in the way we are looking at these international cooperation tools, so that we draw after having set this different example. First, on knowledge sharing, that's what we said just before with the example. We should structure the discussion around the industrial organization. So I'm coming back to this dimension of logistics organization. So freight should be discussed in the context of the industrial organization and not just discussed about the vehicles on one hand or just with a limited scope. Then the way we structure this knowledge sharing and capacity building should be based indeed on these country needs, and we should be able to enter into country-specific details. And I made, by opposition to what we have seen too many times, some discussions that are only skimming at the surface and discussing broadly or in general what are the main policies. No, we need to take a concrete example. As I was mentioning with the South African, we start from that and we discuss together how this interacts with other experience. Technical assistance. Clearly, we need, just one of the messages, to focus and get more support on these organizational changes. There are already a lot of elements regarding the change of zero-emission vehicles. There are already many aspects. But clearly on these organizational changes, the industrial planning and all these elements, this is also critical for freight, and this is a gap, and this is where we should focus energy. And second element, as mentioned again by Henry, on this case of freight, should be demand-driven, by opposition to what we have seen also, which is more driven by technical assistance offers. So countries that offers indeed technical assistance from what they want to propose in a way, or what they know. No, it should start from what is needed for the transition and then identifying the good technical assistance that they could find, let's say, in the space of the technical assistance offers that exist. On finance, I just mentioned it many times, but analyze infrastructure change in transport, but also in the industrial sectors. So to really not only finance infrastructure, transport infrastructure, but also industrial infrastructure, to localize them, identify in the value chain what are some types of industry that should be developed in the country to shorten supply chain, or again, what are the manufacturing processes that needs also to be financed in order to be aligned with a more circular economy that reduce, for example, the impact and the tons that requires to be transported, or how this is transported if it's more circular and closer in some ecosystems. And also the challenge here for us, from what we have seen in this discussion, is that first it should be country specific to really encourage in it, and infrastructure specific. So we need to have these discussions that start from those examples to then have a discussion that is more oriented towards what are the country specific and infrastructure specific barriers. Because very often we have discussions about, we know for such type of infrastructure, general barriers, but general barriers will not be the same in Nigeria than in Senegal, and we need to be able to enter into those details to better understand what fits their specific transition. And finally, trade. So clearly, it is something that is a big blind spot in current trade agreements and trade discussions and trade cooperation. It does not consider the impact of trade on freight decarbonization. And this is clearly important to have a better consideration of what trade would mean in terms of freight transport emissions. And second, this is also an opportunity, if we anchor that in the discussion of trade cooperation, to discuss also what are the requirements for developing a more regional, continental, and sustainable industrial value chain and associated logistics. So in trade cooperation agreement, we have seen more and more local content requirements or those type of elements that can support the different organizational change that we have mentioned just before. And I would just stop here also recognizing, the different colleagues and co-authors that have worked on this freight chapter and that you can see here. So the colleagues from France, from Brazil first, from France, from Nigeria, 3 of them here, and Chuck's that we are really happy, Okereke that is here. And of course, colleagues from India and colleagues from South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. And so here I propose that we move to the panel discussion. So I'd like to invite our panelists to join. So we have Professor Chukwumeje Okereke. We have from Nigeria. I will let you introduce yourself when you take the floor, because I think that the experience is that people do a better job of highlighting, but you have so many hats that I wouldn't know which ones to pick here. Some are far from Senegal and Energy, and Frido from Kuhne Foundation. So please, maybe Jan, you can sit and we'll just work in a panel format. So we thought that we could be organizing this panel in 2 moments. One, which is about starting from the national angle of this question of freight decarbonization. And with that, I'd like first to give the floor to you, Chucks, to share the perspective from Nigeria on this question, the main challenges for freight decarbonization, and maybe some ideas you may have about the policy priorities. So I give you further floor, and I will ask the same question to Samba to share the Senegal perspective. So Chucks.
Well, thank you very much, Henri and Jan, for your excellent presentations and for highlighting this important topic about freight decarbonization. I would actually like to step back and engage with one of the things that you said about the DDP. I don't think we celebrate enough the way that DDP is actually country-driven and country-owned. This is a mantra that you hear everywhere in COP and international negotiation. But this is my first experience of actually seeing a project or program that really is very light touch from the funders, from, in this case, the international support organizations. So I really want to thank you, all of you, for the way that you not only emphasize multi-stakeholder engagement, but country ownership. And because of the country ownership approach that we took in the Nigerian DDP, we were actually able to go a little bit more into freight, into a broad range of transport mode than was the case with the NDC. And it's actually very well recognized that the detailed analysis we did in the transport sector and the follow sector are some of the 2 major distinguishing factors between the NDC analysis and the DDP analysis. We found that 16% of the national inventory, which represents about 67.3 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, comes from the transport sector. We also found that the transport sector is the fastest growing sector in Nigeria between 2018, which is the base year, to 2060. And so this is one of the big findings. Now, we also found that although currently 90% of the goods in the country are transported by trucks, and this comprises mostly light duty and also heavy duty. And we found that the freight, in the air freight, there will be a growth of from the current 19.8 million tons kilometer to 286 million tons kilometer. In the case of road, we are looking at an increase of about 2.7 million to 14.4 million. And in the case of rail freight, a projection of about current 1.34 million tons kilometer to 168 million tons kilometer. Huge, huge increase. And so I really share your sentiment, Jan, that this is not something that is talked about anywhere near enough as it should be. And our work at the DDP Nigeria has helped to highlight this. And we plan to take these numbers and analysis to the necessary government officials in Nigeria. Because you said something that I really agree with, and I put a really bold letter on it, that a real mark of advancement in national decarbonization discourse is a movement from the holistic overarching numbers to sector-specific analysis. And Nigeria, so far, has been hovering quite a lot in big overarching numbers. Net zero, 2060, 47% reduction, 2030, NDC. But there hasn't been detailed focus on sectors. And so I have made a big asterisk that going forward, this will now have to be our main focus. How do we take these big numbers and then drive much more detailed sector analysis, but also detailed sector reforms? So I'll leave it at this, and then I think in the next round we can then go into the issue of international cooperation. But I just want to highlight that I am grateful to DDP, the support that we receive from all of you, because it has really enabled us to go into sector analysis, especially in the transport sector, much better than was done in the previous, and that the issue of freight is one of the key things that we've identified that needs more attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackson. Maybe we can say that all these elements are notably captured in the long-term strategy that was released yesterday based on this work, and that it includes notably the details on the sector level, including on transport, which you described. So congratulations for that. Let me ask the same question to Samba about to share the perspective from Senegal on this question.
So thank you again. I take this also the opportunity to present myself. I'm Samba Fall, and I worked at Enda Energy. I'm responsible for climate and systemic transition. But also I would like to seize this opportunity to really acknowledge the support given by AFD and IDRI to help us to move forward when it comes to the at the moment what we call co-construction of trajectories. And as Professor have said, this is a real opportunity that has been seized by national stakeholders in Senegal to develop a process that has been started since March 2022, and it helped us. I know that Nigeria has just validated its LTS, but also last week we have been very successful to validate our LTV. And the LTV is long-term vision, is one of the key criteria for the JETP of Senegal. So in this spirit, I would like also to thank the support given. So if I want to come back to the question raised by Henry, first of all, I would like to again stress that the transport profile is almost the same in Western Africa. So, and especially when it comes to freight transport, mostly driven by heavy truck that are transporting all merchandise and all the goods from within the national context, but also in the sub-region, because West Africa is also marked by a lot of transport freight within our region, between Senegal, Mali, between Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, and all the country that are belonging to us. And I think that one of the main challenges that we face there is, first, is the silos in terms of policy design, because most of the time, for sure, Senegal has been able to draft, to have some regulatory frameworks since back to 1980, sometimes in 1990 or 2020. But the main issue is, at the moment still, we don't see the synergies developed within the policy area. Second is, again, the weak or sometimes late implementation of such regulatory frameworks. Because sometimes I know that for back in 2020, in the last couple years, there is a lot of effort made by Senegal and the Western African region in terms of regional policies. But the thing is that the implementation of such policies is a bit weak or sometimes late. And the second one, and the third one in terms of challenges, I think is each country has its own framework, and sometimes it does not help when you want to run or to transport goods from Senegal to another country in Western Africa, and that's where it starts. And you do see that there is a lot of customers issue because of the operability between countries. And I think that is something that has to be fixed if we want to move forward. And last but not least also is the late perception of the climate value, added value into the sectors. Because for a long time, the perception was more driven by development angle, but not in the climate angle. So they don't foresee really the value added of developing decarbonized transportation services. But I think that for the couple years ago, they start to work on the how to develop. They have been establishing new program to renew existing truck and also existing transport freight services. So maybe I can stop here, but one of the challenges that we are facing is, especially when we have started our process in Senegal, we have started the process by establishing what we call an infrastructure thematic transition working group with one of our key actors in Senegal, which is working on this area. But what we have seen is that there is a lot of discrepancies in terms of data. So even for the national communication and the BUR, we are facing issue to assess really the GHG emission in this particular sector. So because we don't have a centralized system where we can have in a due courses all the data required to better assess the level of the GHG emission for this particular sector. And we are facing this issue, and I think that it is something that we need to fix if we want to have more robust and coherent policy in this particular sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samba. And I'd like to build on what you just mentioned incidentally, which I think is central to all this discussion, is that probably that the usual framing of the question with the sector angle, talking about freight transport, is a reduction of the problem. Because here the main question that we are trying to address is really at the interface between freight transport, industrial organization, and more generally the whole organization of the economy. And that's probably the only way to really address these sectoral emissions that eventually come from the transport sector. But if we really want to act on them, the levers not necessarily are fully inside the transport sector as it's conventionally being defined in climate, but requires just to think more broadly about the industrial organization. Which leads me just maybe to pass the mic to Friedel from the Kühne Foundation. So maybe I will let you explain what you are doing, but notably with this idea to try to explore what it means just to connect this issue of transport decarbonization with all the questions notably that relate to logistics organization, and notably maybe you can explain your interest in the African context more specifically. So I hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the Kühne Foundation is a Swiss foundation with German roots, but a lot of international work, specifically with countries across Africa. Historically, we have mostly worked in humanitarian logistics as well as in logistics higher education. For example, we have a program on logistics education with 34 academic institutions across the African continent, helping them to establish bachelor and supply chain degree programs, so that it is possible to study these issues in countries in Africa. Right now there are in fact 10,000 students also enlisted in these programs that the Kühne Foundation was supporting. So quite a long and successful history of working with university partners. So now I'm new to the Kühne Foundation. I've joined to set up their climate change program. The Kühne Foundation is a very logistics-focused foundation, simply because we come from an entrepreneur in logistics, Mr. Kühne from Kühne & Nagel. And so we also want to do projects now in the field of logistics and climate. I myself, I'm responsible for a project on building the foundation for low-carbon logistics in Eastern Africa, so not so much in Western Africa, so Nigeria and Senegal I haven't dealt with so far, but might well be in the future. And where I was coming from before I joined Kühne Foundation was International Cooperation for Sustainable Freight Transport. I've spent 12 years with the German Agency for International Cooperation, focused there very much on sustainable freight in Asian countries, specifically in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Thailand, the Philippines, and so on. So you've mentioned, we need to basically work on a circular economy, for example. We need to, because, some people say, okay, with the circular economy, we will have more transport because we have more transport links in that chain. But actually that does not matter because the benefit of doing things circular, you save so many resources, is greater than the extra transport. And the same thing maybe is with more regional trade instead of global trade. Maybe it is greener to produce a certain good in another country where it is greener to produce it than ship it around the world than to produce it in your own country where, it is less green to produce the same good. So a lot of international manufacturing, a lot of global trade, issues that need to be looked at there. And I think some economists, they call this the green comparative advantage, claiming that goods should be produced where they can produce with the lowest carbon footprint, right? And that is not necessarily the one closest to your home. Because when you look at the carbon footprint of international supply chains, often the share of transport in that supply chains is relatively small, but the share of actually the production emissions, that is the bigger part. And that makes it for me also so challenging why logistics is so challenging, because transport logistics emissions are so dispersed, right? There are so many little pieces and so many individual emitters that have to be dealt with, and they're all corporate, private sector companies. It's different than passenger transport, where you deal with public transport agencies, where you have a much stronger involvement of governments. In my experience in the countries where I'm familiar with, in the government it's even often not so clear who's responsible for freight transportation, Ministry of Transport feels responsible more for the passenger transport, for moving people, not goods. Or at least the responsibility for movement of goods is shared between different government agencies, Ministry of Trade and so on, maybe also involved, the Ministry of Industry. So that complicates basically the governance of the whole sector. And on top of that comes the problem that you have a sector that is full of small and medium-sized enterprises, often in informal settings. So any regulation, maybe reaches the bigger companies, but you also have to be inclusive and involved in the green transformation, the smaller companies, if you want to be successful, because this is where a lot of people are employed and work and earn their livelihood. And these SMEs, same situation, by the way, also in Europe and in Germany. They're not only poor in cash, they don't have funds to invest in new technology necessarily, but they also have no time to deal with new technologies or new knowledge, to take a training, because they have to take care of the business, and that's a challenge for engaging for international cooperation also. All these the stakeholders. Maybe I stop there and continue later.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, and you provide a perfect hook for the second part of the discussion that we may go to, which is more about, this perspective on international cooperation. So basically, I'd like to go back to Chuck's to, elaborate on your perspective, maybe, using your hat from a Nigerian perspective, using your hat from an African perspective, but also using your hat of an international expert of this question of international cooperation to highlight from your perspective what are those key limitations that are existing today and the priority innovation, if we had to focus on a few key elements, including in this context of the UNFCCC, but more broadly in the transport sector, but also maybe in other sectors, what would you identify as priority items on this agenda for the international community?
Well, thanks very much, Henri. I have a couple of points that I would like to make with regards to the role of international cooperation in reducing emissions in the transport sector generally, in freight in particular, but even in the overarching discourse of decarbonization. If you look at the work that we've done again at the LTS, what you find, and this is not is not rocket science or revelational, but a predominant amount of the the vehicles in Nigeria are very aged, old vehicles. You could say imported, some would say dumped in Nigeria. And what this tells you is actually is something that is kind of much broader. Historically, we see that when progress is being made in any particular issue area in international cooperation, the squeezing and the phasing out of a particular technology, mostly in the West, often results in the increase in such technologies in poorer countries. Whether you're talking about smoking, when smoking started to be banned in the West, the smoking really just went off the roof in developing countries. The same thing also has happened in the issue of oil and gas. And we see a lot of demand for kind of phase off in the north, although I can still challenge the fact that there are still a lot of developed countries that are committed to tapping out their gas and oil. But that has resulted, it's been kind of shifted down to poorer and developing countries. And so one key area of international cooperation is really to look at maybe a regional or even global policy around this issue of dumping old vehicles and technologies in Africa. Because this is also one of the major sources of pollution and death in Nigeria. Even if you talk a little bit less about carbon, it's also one of the major health hazards. The second area of international cooperation, I think, will be around border control and security. Nigeria recently said that they were committed to removing, and in fact did remove to some extent, fossil fuel subsidy. Interestingly, one of the biggest reasons they gave was that, we cannot keep on subsidizing the cost of fuel for all the countries in West Africa. By which they meant that people were buying at a much cheaper price and using these light trucks and heavy trucks to move the fuel across to neighboring countries. So unless you deal with this issue of border porosity and security, this is going to be a problem that will carry on. I think one area that's also been neglected, and that Ian mentioned it in his knowledge sharing, is the issue of research. So I'm quite glad to see that the Kingdom Foundation is emphasizing this knowledge creation in Africa. One of the biggest problems that we have in Africa is that a lot of policies are not based on locally produced, in-depth, high-quality research. And Samba was making a little point about this around the issue of data, lack of data availability. Often when we have, say, France, Africa cooperation on equal levels, it's not equal levels because a lot of the heavyweight analytical lifting that's going to shape the contours of cooperation has been done not on equal basis. So you already start on a very unequal research foundation that is shaping the conversation that is happening at the international level. And so when you come to a COP28 like this or any other COP, a lot of the basis of analysis, a lot of the basis of discussion will come from analysis like IDRI, IDOS, ODI, etc. have produced. But we don't have such rigor of analysis coming from ENDA, from CCDA, IFNI, from locally based think tanks. And I have gone around Europe trying to express this point as robustly as I can, that if you don't invest in long-term research capacity, and then you come to a summit or a COP and you want to talk with African leaders and forge a cooperation on an equal basis, you're kind of deluding yourself. And this is why I'm really quite proud of this work that we have done here in the Nigerian LTS, which is the first time that an African country that I know of, perhaps with the exception of South Africa and to some extent Senegal, been behind the quantitative analysis that is shaping a long-term document. I haven't done a real numbers at crunching, but off on top of my head and impressionistically, I think over 80% of African NDCs have been produced by foreign modeling work. Okay, so we need to change the basis for knowledge creation. Jan said knowledge sharing. It's okay, but I will even say knowledge creation and sharing. Okay, I have several points here, so I don't want to take too much of my time, and I might come back and because I have points on international finance cooperation, transparency, technology transfer, regional cooperation, value add, closer to home. We can get into the critical minerals and all of those kind of things. But I will pause here, and then if there is time, I can elaborate on some of these other points.
Thanks, Jux. We'll make sure to come back to you so that you can elaborate on these points. But I think that I also, go back to Samba and the point that you're making about the need for, domestically developed knowledge and the need, and pointing to the fact that is a challenge that we are facing, which is that it takes time. It's not something that can be developed overnight. That's probably one of the critical challenges that we're facing when designing this international cooperation, because there is a sense of urgency. We need to find solutions now, but if you try to design the solutions now, you need to be based on the existing knowledge. So there is a kind of a chicken and egg problem that's creating, and a circle that needs to be broken, where, yes, it's urgent, but it's urgent also to anticipate the long term, and that's basically the type of work that we are facing. Going back to Samba for the Senegalese perspective, and I will let you elaborate on the question of international cooperation, but just want to share, the experience we've had of engaging in Senegal. And here there is the elephant in the room of the question of gas in Senegal, where, I think that the discussion on international cooperation is crystallizing a lot, right? Because there is a question that donors from the Western side don't want to fund gas because that's their approach. On the other hand, it's a legitimate approach to Senegal to say the priority is energy access. So the real question is, do we need gas or not to provide this energy access? And among other things, I would be very interested that you can tell us this story about what type of approach. I don't want to take you a position one, whether Senegal needs to develop gas or not, but what does it change if there is some country-driven perspective like the one that you're developing with this project to this question of gas or any other matter that relate to international cooperation, and how much it allows Senegal to engage in this process of international cooperation in a way that can be centered on the needs of Senegal, and not necessarily only on the perspective that comes from external actors. So back to you, Samba.
Yeah, I'm saying that I am very confident, and I think that this is a very useful debate. And I think that over the last month, we have been under pressure, if I can say, because at that time, Senegal was negotiating the JETP, and one of the most important question at that time was to what extent Senegal can move toward the renewable energy target. And at that time, successfully, we have started, as Professor have said, at the national level, a nationwide process to develop the knowledge needed to really assess how much Senegal can go into the renewable energy target opposed to the gas. And at that time, the question was, what is the extent? And I think that what we managed to do is, look, we are in the stage of modeling the energy transition. We are not yet getting there with a quantitative result, but at the same time, the stakeholder engagement that we have managed to put into place, and ENDA was driven the process, but with the line ministries, energy and also environment. And we have managed also to include private sectors, non-state actors, and all experts working around this area. And throughout a very local, national-driven process, we managed to set four scenarios based on the supply and demand. And demand because we know that we have demand of energy for the agriculture, but also for our industrial process, and it is needed. So should we phase down and do not use our oil and gas for the sake of the climate? It is not the case. And I think that what we have agreed is that through this participatory approach, we can say we have a set of scenarios. One, it is complying with the national NDC target, but also one, it is really centralized on how to resolve the energy access with any means of that energy means that we have. Either it can be from oil or gas or renewable energy. This is our what we call energy access scenarios. And another scenarios which is dealing with how to improve now the renewable energy, because that at that time in 2050 the demand will be low because of many policies and measures that we will put into place. So we can have like a green energy access because we have renewable energy, but also the demand will be a bit low. But to come back to the energy access scenario, what we agreed, again, it's not ENDA's position, but Senegalese position is to really use the current gas and oil to really fulfill the energy needs. And the energy needs is not only extra for lighting, but also energy for cooking and all the energy needs. So it's the whole energy system. And I think that we have learned a lot. And to come back to the question is, for sure, the analysis should be done by national actors. Because for two reasons. First, they have a better knowledge of the needs and the constraints. But also they have this is an opportunity to develop their skills when it comes to project or prospective analysis. Because that's where I will end my proposal. It is, if we want to develop the international cooperation, we should first develop it into a need-based approach. And I think that is the best way to because if you develop into the need-based approach, you will always, when you are developing project, you have to dig deeper and to find solution to have a long-term partnership, not only partnership based on a single project. That is, I think that sometimes it's a bit difficult to manage. Second is to help to develop synergies when you are developing, you want to develop a project for the local knowledge. Because most of the time, the institution don't have, especially if I take the example from Senegal, it's not only transportation matters, but all the sectors that have a direct effect to climate change does not really have a unit which is developing prospective analysis. And most of the time is developed by what we call the national development economic institutions. But if you go to the sectoral level, they don't have any kind of figure after 2030. 2030, because 2030 was the NDC target. So after 2030, we don't know exactly what is the trajectories that is needed for that. And if you don't have such analysis of what are the needs in terms of the skill, but what are the needs in terms of analysis that has to be done, we can't really have a good portrait of our future economic studies. So I really want that if we are developing a partnership to consider this long-term impact, but also to develop the synergies between institutions, because it is important in Senegal now even to put our time horizon in 2050. It was a huge debate, because in Senegal we have a regulatory binding framework that you should not develop a policy which is exceeding the current time horizon, because it is 2030 or 2035. So you should not go beyond this target. And we have, I think, from the technical and expertise, try have a series of discussion with national economic planning institution to say, from the climate change angle perspective, 2030 is not the right time horizon. So Senegal is aiming to contribute to the climate neutrality, and we have to showcase in the global agenda what Senegal can manage to contribute. And the LTV is one of the responses, and we are also very proud as a non-state actors to coordinate all the technical aspects that has been developed to lead to the LTV process. So thank you. I take too much time, but I think that it was worth to mention all this because Senegal is I can say a special stakeholder engagement, because it was not easy. Ari can tell more about it, but I think that we managed to connect the dots and make it possible.
Thanks, Samba. And the problem is not that you speak too long, that we don't have enough time to give you provide all these details, which I think are extremely informative. And just here, the Senegalese example, notably in the context of the JETP discussion, shows that the process really matters. And what has been achieved was not only to use the process to reveal the needs of the countries, but it was also useful to make all the stakeholders reflect on the real needs of the countries and what Senegalese stakeholders achieved under your coordination was different from what was the initial idea. There were some reflections that were added in terms of notably the space that can be given to renewables and regarding the time horizon. So maybe a part of the JETP deal, which is maybe a bit overlooked, people, rightfully focus on the targets in the short term that are defined, but there is also provision that links that to the work on the long-term strategy that will be developed going forward. And this perspective, as you were saying, may sound obvious from the outside, but it was not, because that was not the way the Senegalese conversation was framed, and this stakeholder process was very helpful in changing that. So that's when we talk about country ownership, and that links back to the point that we were making earlier, that's also something where we need to give time to this process to deliver and to make sure that what comes out of it, it's not just a ticking box exercise. We say, okay, we've consulted, and so, but that this is a process that really helps the country reveal what they really need. I'd like to come back to you, Friedel, on this question of international cooperation. So you had started to, you stopped your introductory remarks on this question, but maybe you can elaborate a bit more about what is your perspective on this question after everything you've heard.
Okay, got it. So the Green Foundation at the moment is exploring whether there could be a regional program for green logistics in Eastern Africa, inspired by green logistic programs that exist in other parts of the world. A green freight program is usually an industry partnership, so companies who are active in the space of logistics work together on green freight solutions, for example, buying electric trucks together, or also working together along the supply chain to see how they can transport things more efficiently, so reduce, for example, the movement of empty trucks or have trucks more fully loaded, to explore together modal shift to rail or to waterways. So it's pretty much an industry-driven approach, not so much something where policymakers are involved. So we are in the process of exploring, okay, this is a program that has worked in other parts of the world. Would it work, or how could it work in Eastern Africa? What are the specific interests of the logistics industry stakeholders in countries like in Kenya or in Tanzania and other countries of Eastern Africa? What would they think should this look like in the case of their respective countries? So in the past couple of months, I've had the privilege to participate in several stakeholder dialogues with national stakeholders to have this discussion, to see where are the pain points and what are the solutions that they are proposing. And what really surprised me very positively is the level of understanding and the level of knowledge that was already in the room. I had expected that we have to, So a lot of the companies, these were big players like DHL and Kühne & Nagel, and big shipping companies or manufacturers, Coca-Cola, for example. They are looking to promote green logistics also in countries like Kenya and Tanzania, because they are multinational companies and they have international targets to fulfill. Their companies have committed to go green, to be net zero by a certain year. So they also have to fulfill this commitment in their operations in African countries. So this is another dimension for me of international cooperation. These are ideas that are brought in from multinational companies, not by international development organizations, who out of their own corporate interests, promote this agenda. And so just last week, actually, I was at a logistics convention in Kenya, actually a regional one with a lot of other countries also involved. And there I asked the question, like, okay, what is your motivation? I was also facilitating a panel with some stakeholders. Like, what is your motivation, to work on green logistics? And the response was, okay, number one, of course, the planetary crisis, we simply must do everything to decarbonize every sector, and logistics is, of course, one of them. Number two, our customers really ask for it. We as a logistics industry, all the clients there, they ask us, do you do also green transport? Do you have electric trucks, or do you use the rail, or, do you understand what your carbon footprint is? So logistics industry does it because of the customer demand, but also because the shareholders, the investors, and their employee, as the heads of the company, what is our company doing about it? And last but not least, companies have started working on green logistics simply because it makes so much economic sense, because there are a lot of cost savings in it. Fuel efficiency can help companies to become more competitive, and companies who are green simply also can get a competitive advantage over companies who haven't taken that step yet. Maybe it makes them more attractive for other clients. So a lot of good reasons, for also logistics companies in African countries, to take steps towards becoming more green, to understand, what is my carbon footprint, what can I do about it, so the debate is already there, and also a lot of action is emerging, and we from the Kühne Foundation are of course committed to support this momentum and see what we can do to accelerate it.
Thank you very much. And I think that you're pointing to something that is, cutting across everything we've been saying, which is that we need to develop processes that involve the diversity of stakeholders. And so the private sector, the companies are a key actor of the transitions we are talking about. And it's only if we manage to organize processes where we can put around the same table the diversity of actors, the governments, the civil society, the companies, etc., that we can find the right solution and the solutions that are relevant for the countries and that are relevant for the private sector. Because as you were saying, we're at a moment where it starts to become clear that the main reason why the change will happen is just because it makes economic sense. Just now, that's something that needs to be translated in the concrete situation and the concrete decision. But it's only by creating the adequate process that maybe we can reach a point where this is actually coming to light. Let's do a very quick final round. We are getting close to the end, but we are not there yet. So as promised, let's go back to Chuck's, notably if you want to elaborate a bit more on the element that you didn't earlier. And then we'll give a final word to each of the panelists and leave a conclusion to Jan. So I'll let you know so that you can start preparing it.
Okay. I can elaborate a little bit on international finance, not only because we are in IDFC, but it's a critical factor, right? We know from several analyses that have been done that poor countries are neck deep in debt, and debt servicing in Nigeria, for example, was at some point 107% of national tax receipts. So we're using more money to service debt than we were actually getting in revenue. Under such a circumstance, it is very difficult to see how a country can invest in critical infrastructure, as, for example, rail, that is actually necessary to decarbonize freight. In my own estimate, both rapid transit and rail are some of the most important critical infrastructure that is required to decarbonize the transport sector, the modal shift. Linked to the lack of critical finance is also a much better governance structure, especially in the area of transparency and accountability, to understand who is lending and under what terms that they are lending. The limited rail infrastructure work that has been done in Nigeria has been mostly through money borrowed from China. But there are publications that have shown that the same number of or kilometer of rail in Ethiopia is cost 18 times less and the same kilometer of rail in China is cost about 27 times less. So a critical dimension is about transparency. How much are we borrowing, and to what extent are we investing the money borrowed in the most cost-effective way? International cooperation is required in some cases to be able to hold developing countries' feet and lenders accountable. But ultimately, we need to see more money flow into critical infrastructure at a rate, interest rate that is that can allow such investment to take place without putting developing countries into more debt. This is a critical aspect of it. We also need in Africa to be, and Samba made mention of it, to be encouraging more regional trade. Currently in Africa, we have just about 18% regional trade. Letters sometimes will go from Nigeria to London and then from London back to Senegal, instead of going from Nigeria to Senegal. So African countries will need to cooperate with the support of international community to open up and link African cities, mostly through railways, because that will really reduce the amount of freight, increase regional trade, and lower GHG emission associated with it. So I really wanted to make that point because it is very critical. Then international cooperation is required in the area of technical innovation. I have already spoken about the bulk of the vehicles in Nigeria being imported. Nigeria used to have 2 assembling plants. I think both of them are now moribund. There has been an attempt by local entrepreneurs to start to assemble, but this is not receiving a lot of boost, both from the government itself. So there was a national furore in Nigeria recently where the National Assembly imported padded security vehicles from abroad when they could have very well patronized the local assembly. And this also is applicable in the area of heavy-duty trucks. So there is need for technological innovation that can allow more assembly, more added value close to the base. As Fredo said, it can be argued in some cases that the way, the place to produce the most, in the most green fashion may not be closest home, but what makes a production cheaper is also politics and economy, okay? It's also who holds the technology. So currently, of course, it is easier to import from China because China maybe or Germany has the predominant of technology. But if you have a different kind of technological innovation, then in 10 years or 20 years' time, it may not be cheaper, greener, to import from Germany because you have made investment to make a competitive production in Nigeria or Senegal possible. So it's also politics.
Thanks for landing on this super important point indeed that the politics is really influencing a lot what makes sense or not in terms of international cooperation. I think that you've already set a clear agenda for some of the priorities that need to be tackled going forward in international cooperation. Samba, final word for you.
Yes, I think that I would like again to build up on what Professor have said, but for at the national level first, because I have seen in Senegal like some development of renewable or renewing the current freight transport vehicle, but sometimes what we see is that after 2 or 3 years, we see this is not adapted to our local condition because maybe it's not well designed, or even though we know that there's a lot of inspection that has been done by the ministry abroad before importing such vehicle. But I think that our point is how not only to develop innovation from national perspective, but also to broaden the engagement of users and also local private transport services, because these are the one who will use and drive people and freight throughout the national and regional. So I think that sometimes what is missing is that we don't consider the views and needs when it comes to develop partnership abroad the country. So I think that is important. And the second point that I think that is very important for the international collaboration is really in the regional area. How Senegal and Mali, or like a direct neighboring country, can not only from the policy level, but also from the private sectors and users perspective, how they can link together and discuss about their needs and issue. And I think that the framing of the solution shouldn't be only based on like local perception only, but it should be broadened as much as possible, because the same goods are being transported from Senegal to the Asia region. So sometimes the missing point is that the top driving or the top-down approach sometimes does not match the needs that or the issue that the local actors are facing. And last but not least, when it comes to the finance also, the main issue is not only transparency, but how the contract are being made, but how the national private or champions can be promoted as much as possible. There is some laws that help to promote national champions when it comes to develop a PPP, but I think that sometimes what is missing is that the local content are not there. Even sometimes it's signed, but when it comes to the implementation, we do face some issue for promoting our national champions. And the last point is sensitization, because nowadays, if we want to move from the development perspective to climate oriented freight services, they have to be more committed. But if we want their commitment, they have to be more sensitized on the value added, and even how they can fund through the carbon market, because it is one avenue that are not really well assessed. And I think that it is something that can, if private sector are well sensitized on the carbon or the climate added value, they can even be more engaged in the PPP contract. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samba. Let's give the final word to Friedel, and then back to Jan to conclude.
Thank you. I think 2 points I want to make. The first one is that, of course, the supply chains between Europe and Africa are, of course, very linked. There's a lot of trade going on between the two continents. So in a way, also, a lot of the freight growing in Africa is caused by demand from Europe. So that makes, for me, also, like, we have a special responsibility, then also to make sure that the freight that is just derived from our demand is supported in that transition, to be decarbonized. And the second point I want to make, again, is referring to the Grüne Foundation. In addition to the Green Freight Program, we also have launched or want to work in the future much more on capacity development. On the one hand, in the academic sphere, so that the topic of climate is also integrated in logistics and supply chain integration, so that the future decision makers who work in that space also understand what the problem and what the solution is. The second point is we want to launch a program on vocational training for people who have maybe a green collar job, for the truck driver or the mechanics, and also for continuous education, executive education on green logistics. So for people who are already working in the companies, that they can upgrade their know-how and understanding of green logistics. So on many different levels, we want to offer capacity development for companies and for young people across Africa in the space of climate and logistics.
Thank you very much. And just to say that your last remarks make me think of another ongoing process that we have at CHIDRI and that Professor Chucks is co-chairing, which is a UCAMA platform. So Chucks is serving as co-chair together with our director. And this UCAMA platform is aimed at facilitating Europe, Africa discussions, and notably to build a discussion on equal footing. And that's a point that Chucks was making, to make sure that there is a true, that we can really capture the African perspective of this partnership between EU and Africa as a way to reinvent it. And what you were saying is a perfect example of these challenges that would need to be reinvented, and where we need to see things differently, and we need to make sure that it's not only a biased discussion, but it's also a discussion that reflects the consequences of what's happening in Europe on Africa, and that we take that into account. Last word to you, Jan. I mean, I said that I would leave you the final word. Just maybe you want to elaborate notably on what would be the next steps. What are the elements that we would want to elaborate further on this work that we've been conducted in the DDP? But so beyond that, final word for you.
Yes, thanks. So, thanks for the wonderful discussions, and actually was difficult to try to summarize that. No, I mean, I have tried to, for me, I learned, and I would like to keep three main elements. The first one that has been raised, I think, among all of you, is the critical dimensions of the bottom-up approach and needs-based approach on all the work, and that one of the critical conditions for being able to do that is this knowledge capacity creation. Thanks, and you are right that in the way we formulate, sharing, but creation is also very important. Education, or also prospective capacity that you mentioned, Samba, in countries, and also you mentioned at the regional level. And I think, I mean, when talking about Africa, that it is something important, and that the international collaboration can support and help. That's the first point. The second one is engagement with the diversity of actors and their own, let's say, implementation tools. So actors, I will start with reacting also to what Friedel says, and the example of the Freight Green Logistics Program and such approach, that saying that, and your reaction also, Chuck, saying that freight decarbonization in the implementation rely a lot indeed on the industries, transformations, and logistics companies. But those transformations are also framed and conditioned by public policies and policymakers that set, I mean, the right level playing field for all the different companies. So we need them also to be more, and that's also one of the lessons of our work, to be more proactive on regulating freight, as for now we have said passenger mobility is mostly their core focus, but they have also a real action to take on these subsectors to actually motivate or support also the companies in the field. So having, let's say, the diversity of actors and their different tools in order to ensure that we can align and go on the right path. And the last, I think, thing I want to keep is about the different areas of transformations we have highlighted. And one that is, I feel, critical and has been raised by both of my colleagues around, when we talk about freight transition, this should be aligned with the climate change challenge, but also the national development priorities. And when I'm saying this, I'm thinking, of course, about industrial development, because this is, and you raised it, industrial development and innovations, local added value. How can we also create local value chains that can benefit for the local development of the countries, and at the same time being consistent with the decarbonization of the sector and the development of this local and regional trade that we have also shared a bit during the panel discussions. Another dimension that is also needs-based and coming from your experience is about rail development. and you highlighted it in the case of Nigeria with, I don't remember the numbers, but almost a factor of 100 in terms of ton-kilometers increase. So the real need for rail development, and you send a last message also to the financing community to support also this transition. So rail freight shift is also a very important area of transformations for the country. And last but not least, and I think it's a very important one that you raised actually, and that we have not raised in the transformation because it was mostly related to road. I mean, in a way, into the vehicles transition, but the old vehicles dumped from the north, and also mentioning, I mean, the relation we have with the trade with Europe, and how we have also a shared responsibility. I mean, from the northern countries also to play or be more proactive on these regulations, that we are able to also provide some vehicles that are adapted, you mentioned it, Samba, to the real needs of your countries. So, and I think I'm just raising this because I think there is a specific event during COP on this question of the old vehicles being dumped from the northern countries in the southern countries, based on the work from IEA, and that could be of interest to see how they look at this topic. And I just stop here, I think, on these three summarizing points, and I thank you all for today.
Thanks a lot. Let's take this to an end. We have an ongoing agenda for collaboration in the next years, but for now, we stop there. Thanks a lot to the panelists for this great conversation, and thanks to everyone for being there. Thank you very much.
Our three goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities. In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals? Knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics. Our 3 goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities. In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework.